Yes, I know. It's very Get a little turnout. Bristol's not right.
He's up here. Okay, good. The younger one, I guess you don't want to
Look out. Run, Tom.
You know, I was going to hug you, but now I'm not.
That's okay.
Happy Thanksgiving to you too. I just left 147 baskets for life. 147 dress baskets. It is huge. Good luck with that. We don't have assigned seats or anything, do we? That's what I figured, they were special. I told him he was special, he has to.
Yeah, but your job is to take care, keep Glenn under traps.
Glenn is his own person and I don't keep him under wraps. I am responsible for Mr. Lodge, that's it.
Just got off like you got the easy job.
Do you want me to introduce you?
Who's responsible for her? Get me some duct tape.
John Roberts is responsible for me. We'll take care of it. I'm Julie.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about super suits.
Yeah, oh, I know, I live in Damariscotta. I've been watching the show. Okay.
How's the dump truck? You good?
See you yesterday,
There's the big farm.
When I sit in that bike,
Big Pete. Look at that Pete.
I'm real slouch. I can't run right.
Okay, if you could start to take your seats and we could see what capacity situation we might have.
Yes, you're a dignitary. Yeah, you gotta come up there.
You can continue to talk, we got 5 minutes, I just wanted to start getting organized, that's all. Just as an administrative aside, we were planning on this meeting to be a private meeting until I found that when you have a quorum on your select board members, that it has to be open to the public. So if there was a misunderstanding on that front, blame me, I should have known. So it is going to be recorded and live streamed. So if you could turn off your cell phones, so we don't have those as a problem.
Hi, Bob.
In fact, I got to turn mine on.
Tom?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I'll call the board to order if you want before you.
Oh, yeah, we can do
start.
that.
Do it now. So
Sure. All right.
Yep. So. Oh, this man. Yeah, perfect. So we get the technicalities out of the way. So.
Go right ahead.
Yeah. So, all right. So this Tom mentioned sticking, blame it on me. Oh, Larry's got the come to the microphone. I'll come up this one up here. So, where the video is.
Say who you are, too.
All right. So as Tom had mentioned, I'm Darrell Frazier, First Selectman, Damariscotta. I'm going to call the Damariscotta Select Board to order. We have quorum, so just to satisfy all the legalities, so we can cover that anyway. So with that, I will call the Damariscotta Select Board to order. Tonight's meeting is basically, what do you call it? Just a joint
Information meeting on aquaculture.
informational aquaculture meeting. So we have Josh Pinkham back there from Damariscotta. I think Dan Hunter just walked in over there, and then Tom's on the board as well. So with that, I'll call the board to order. The only thing on our agenda is to sit back and listen to everybody. We're excited to see so many people at a select board meeting. Usually we do the pledge. Do you have a flag up somewhere? You want to do the pledge?
Yeah. We can do a pledge to the wall, I suppose.
Yeah.
But,
Is there no flag in here?
no, there isn't a flag.
Good Lord. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, we can.
We'll dispense with
Yeah.
that.
All right.
All right.
We usually do the pledge, but I don't have a flag. Sorry. Yeah.
All
All
right.
yours.
I think we probably could get started. Okay, well, welcome everybody. As Darrell said, I'm Tom Anderson. I'm a selectman at, or a member of the select board at Damariscotta. And this meeting got started when I had heard about 8 months ago about the potential for moratoriums in a couple of towns applying to aquaculture. And so I brought it up at our select board meeting. And of course, I got volunteered into looking into it by Darrell. So that's why we're here basically, is to discuss some of the issues that are coming up and being heard in other towns, and so we can share that amongst ourselves along with our state legislators and other interested parties that are here. The goal obviously will be to try to get the issues on the table, see if we can work towards some solutions, or at least approach some solutions. So with that, I just want to go over a couple of administrative things. I already mentioned the cell phones, but the restrooms, if you go through that door, the first one is on the immediate left. If you go through the lobby, there's another one on the other side. So I want to thank everybody, first of all, for taking time out 2 days before Thanksgiving. I hope you turned the oven off. And I want to thank Coastal Rivers for donating the space for this meeting, and also LCTV for managing it and doing the promotion and also the recording. Before we get started, I want to introduce some of our special guests sitting here in the prime seats, the orchestra. We have, in no particular order, Cameron Rennie, our state representative from District 13. Maybe you could stand. I don't know if everybody can see you, but. And then we have Lydia Crafts, our state representative from District 46. And the hunter here, Abden Simmons from Waldoboro, District 45. Okay. In addition, we also, is Amanda Ellis here? Could you stand? Amanda Ellis is the Director of Aquaculture for the Department of Maine Resources, State of Maine. And she was also awarded this year Manager of the Year in Maine. So that's congratulations for that. Is Cole Canwit here?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Could you, yeah, stand. Cole,
Curtsy?
yeah. Yeah. Cole is the Director of Public Health and Aquaculture, State of Maine. So we've got some pretty prominent people here today. And then, of course, we have members of 4 select boards, I believe. Those from South Bristol, could you raise your hand?
Adam Rice,
Oh, Adam Rice is here? Just one, right?
just one tonight.
Okay, and then Waldeboro? 3 from Waldeboro. And then Newcastle. And of course, Damariscotta, we already went through our group. But, all right, and then of course we have aquaculture people here by requirement, because that's what we're talking about, and they're the experts. So I want to thank all of you to come and spend the time, and I realize this is bad timing right before Thanksgiving, but believe me, it's been very hard to get all the important people together and to get the space and everything else. So I'm going to say a few things before Amanda Ellis gives her presentation. And I would ask that all of you, if you have something to say when we start the open conversation, to come up to this microphone and announce your name and what you're associated with. So if you're not, if you're oyster farmer, the name of your company and your name, and that's it. And while those people are speaking, we don't want any interruptions, obviously, let them finish. And if you want to make a comment in response to what somebody says after they're done, then just raise your hand and I'll recognize you to come up to the microphone. And if there are two or more hands go up, I'll try to remember where they all are and just keep your hand up. Okay. I know some people in this audience are concerned about the purpose of the meeting, and even me as the moderator, because I, like everybody else here, have my opinions about aquaculture. But I'm going to let you guys decide, what you want to say. I'm not going to say much one way or the other. But, the necessities for this meeting is, again, because we've got, the primary producer of oysters in this area is Damariscotta, Newcastle. Yet there are other couple of towns that are considering moratoriums for aquaculture. So that certainly got our interest in Damariscotta, and we wanted to investigate and find out the reasons, and we'll presumably hear about that tonight. So for the last 8 months, I've been poking around, and maybe I ruffle some feathers in the process, talking to all kinds of people, Department of Marine Resources, all the select boards, the aquaculture farmers, and just trying to learn about the industry. And I got to say, after 8 months, that I know now that I'll never know anything near what the people that do this kind of work know. Is way more complex than I thought it was, and they work very hard. And we need to sustain them and work with them to see if we can resolve our differences. So the oyster farmers, select board members, harvesters, are there any harvesters here? Okay, great. 3, all right, excellent. All right, so we think we got the mix that we were looking for to get everybody's input. I think the goal is to understand what a good balance is between a viable oyster farming industry and our waterways and the safety of the waterways, and also their use for recreation and just general beauty. I think all those things come into play when we're trying to work together. There has to be, it can't be 100% one way and it can't be 100% the other. It's got to be some compromise. But let's not forget how we got here. I mean, 2,000 years ago, the oysters were naturally reproducing, and we were flooded with oysters, the river was. And then, we had shipbuilding, and we had brick making, and then we had pollution. And it wasn't but maybe 35, 40 years ago that some of the people in this audience actually revived the industry and started growing oysters, cultivating them. And some of them are in this room, and that we have to recognize that contribution. I don't know about you, but I love oysters. I won't tell you my favorite one, but I can eat any one of them off the Damariscotta River, I can tell you that. So, you know, I'm not one that's interested in killing the golden goose. The oyster industry here, and I'll give you some statistics in a minute, but the oyster industry, which is predominantly located on the Damariscotta River, is a very, very lucrative industry, and it contributes a lot to the economy. It creates jobs, and it brings tourists and other visitors to our area. And it's given us the reputation of being the Napa Valley of oysters, along with the oyster capital of Maine and now the oyster capital of New England. So those are all valuable marketing kinds of assets. And I also appreciated over the last 8 months the cooperation of all the oyster farmers that I've met. And I want to applaud, well, Brendan's not here, but Brendan Parsons and Jeff McKean and Sarah Gladeau. Is Sarah in the room? From Coastal Rivers? Oh yeah, in the back. They gave a presentation at Lincoln Theater. I don't know if anybody went there, but it was excellent. It was well attended. In fact, I've never seen a packed audience in that theater. I don't think there was a seat left. So there's a lot of interest about aquaculture, and they did a great job. I also want to thank Brendan and Jeff Augers over here from Muscongas Bay for giving tours, complimentary tours of their facilities to a number of people. That kind of education is very valuable. And in fact, there's a industry association that created a program called SLOW, which is acronym for, you must know what it is. What is it, Smokey? No? Oh, all right. So I'll get it for you. It stands for Social License to Operate. And what they're actually doing is helping train farmers as to how to interact with local communities and, you know, to give them some of these tours and educational sessions like Smokey and Brendan did at the theater. So I think that outreach is excellent, and you know, I think it was well received, and I would encourage them to continue that. So you know, as I said, I learned a lot, but let me ask you a question. How many people know how a triploid oyster is created? Raise your hand. All right. So now you know who the oyster people are. Raise your hand again. These are all the oyster farmers. So a triploid is a 3-chromosome oyster that doesn't generally reproduce. It grows faster, it's generally plumper, and in the summer months apparently it tastes better, although I would probably not be able to tell. But in any case, you take a tetraploid, which is 4 chromosomes, you marry it to a diploid, which is 2, and you get a triploid. And they're becoming more common because, as I said, they grow faster and they're more profitable, etc. So I learned that, you know, and I learned a lot of things, but I'm not going to bore you with all that stuff because you'll learn it tonight too, I think, in the dialogue. But we wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for the outstanding concerns of our communities. Oyster farmers certainly realize there's been some opposition, and you can read it in the paper. In fact, I think that somebody told me there's an article about aquaculture in today's paper. I don't know, the Lincoln County News. I haven't read it, so I don't know what it says, but it's not an uncommon thing. These kinds of meetings are happening all over the state. There was one 2 weeks ago in Brunswick, I believe. I don't know what the result of that was, but I think we do have, regardless of these conflicts, I think we have a lot in common. I think we all love our rivers and our waterways. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. They're probably the primary reason we live here, or at least one of them, and they bring visitors from all over the world, as I said. Most of all, I think we all love oysters, and at least I know I do. If you live around here, you're probably a fan of oysters because they're considered some of the best in the world. And anecdotally, I've been to the farthest point west in San Francisco, and I saw 3 Damariscotta oysters on the menu probably 3 or 4 years ago. And then I was in Miami Beach, and I saw them on the menu down there. I was in Washington, D.C., I saw Damariscotta oysters. And I think some of them are shipped around the world. So they're considered some of the best in the world, if not the best. And I think for those reasons, we have an asset that we don't want to in any way negatively affect. And we want them to grow and prosper, but at the same time, we want them to be cognizant of the concerns of the communities and to work with us to balance out the application of aquaculture within the community, because we all share these waterways. And hopefully we'll come up with some ideas today. So finally, I just want to give you some statistics that you may not be aware of that I find interesting. The global oyster and clam market size was valued at $108 billion in 2022. Most of that is in Asia, and they do a lot of different types of cultivation over there, but most of the oyster production is in Asia, because only 7.5 billion of that was in the United States of America. It used to be that 60% of the oyster production was done in the state of Washington, and now you've got the South all the way down to Alabama, Florida doing oyster production. Obviously Delaware, the Chesapeake, the Cape, Massachusetts does a lot, and even down south and north now, they're doing oyster cultivation. So we want to support the aquaculture businesses, and I think we will learn some of their concerns tonight, hopefully. We'll try to draw people out and get the dialogue going. But again, don't step on anybody. Just let everybody do their thing one at a time, and we'll get through it. Another interesting fact is that the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center, I already mentioned this, they created that SLOW program, which stands for how aquaculture farmers can interact with the community. And then there's a company in Waldoboro, I just found this out, and I don't even know if the people here from Waldoboro know this, but that is pioneering the cultivation of oysters on land, and has been for the last 4 years. They got these giant tanks and whatever, and they're growing oysters on land. Does that, the people from Waldoboro, you know about that? Okay, good. Maybe you can even talk to it later. But I thought that was fascinating. I just happened to find out when I was doing research. So a couple of statistics. There was an estimated 6 million pounds of oysters produced in Maine in 2021 for a value of $10 million. And then the counts changed now from from individual oysters, from pounds to individual oysters. So the other years were counts of oysters. So that was 2021. In 2020, there were 10 million oysters for a value of $7 million, 4 million of which came from the Damariscotta River. That's statewide. And these statistics come right off the Maine website, so that's where the data's coming from. And then at the time in 2020, when it was valued at 7 million for the state, the national production was 187 million, and slightly more than 13.8 million oysters were produced in 2019 in the state for a value of 9.6 million. And then the dip in 2020 might have been a COVID-related thing, but it went down. But then it came back up in 2022. The data that, for 2022, all I know is anecdotally it went up, but I don't have the data because it's not on the DMR website at this point. So currently, according to the DMR's website, there are 24 active standard leases on the Damariscotta River, occupying approximately 160 acres. So a standard lease is anything from 3 years to 5 to 10 to 20 years long. So generally speaking, most of the larger ones are going for 20 years because of the capital investment. So we have a lot of the river already being occupied and, reserved, if you will, for those farmers. The number of 160 acres does not include 87 what I call limited purpose licenses. Those sometimes are for experiments, sometimes they're for logistics, sometimes they're for wintering oysters, looking at the details on the Maine's DMR's website, it appears a lot of them are 133 feet long and 3 feet wide, which would be a string of oyster cages. So the maximum for those licenses is 400 square feet. So those are not counted in the 160 acres. That 160 acres represents 17% of all oyster acreage in the state of Maine. So it's a large amount. And there are 1,506 active shellfish leases in Maine at the moment. And that includes, does not include kelp or mussels or salmon, which are also, aquaculture leases, but they're not counted. This is just the oysters. Okay, so I'm confident you're all proud of some of these statistics. At least I am. I'm very proud of hearing people say, am I in the oyster capital of New England? And, acknowledging that. I love the oyster fest that we have and have had for years. I love the fact that Brendan Parsons has been winning the championship, oyster shucking championship, and I witnessed that a number of times. So we have a lot going on, and hopefully we can recognize that and have a good positive dialogue. To close, we wouldn't be having this meeting if it were not for the real and perceived concerns about the future of the aquaculture industry. I believe that to continue the success of oyster farming in our area, we will need to find solutions to issues between the farmers and the public. And my hope is the dialogue tonight will start that process. I will now turn the meeting over to Amanda, who will give us a rundown of the process, the licensing process. And after that, we'll get into more of the detail and start asking for people's individual thoughts and opinions. Okay, Amanda, it's all yours.
Thank you, everybody. It's good to be here this evening and talk to you a little bit more about the state's aquaculture licensing and leasing process. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that probably everybody has a perspective or opinion on aquaculture, but our purpose here this evening is to explain about the process and to listen and learn from you all. I think one thing that I want to share is I became director in April of 2023. Prior to that, had worked for the Aquaculture Division as a hearings officer and worked for the department on regulations and special licenses, so recognize many of you in the room this evening through those various capacities. But one thing that in kind of becoming the director of a program, we're really in listening mode right now. And one thing that we're hearing from stakeholders is maybe that there are some aspects of the process that aren't very approachable, and it's hard to engage with the process. And so we're taking in that feedback and learning from it, and really trying to make a conscious effort to improve our outreach efforts. And also wanted to share that as part of that, we are exploring right now the offering aquaculture listening sessions. So those would be kind of an opportunity to have more of a statewide conversation with stakeholders, a facilitated conversation about some of these bigger picture questions that I think communities are thinking about across the state. So, but with that, I'll sort of jump in and give a general overview. I do want to note that we did bring some handouts with us. They're on the back table that explain, that go into greater depth about the leasing and licensing process. And we also brought copies of a letter that we recently issued about the state's position on moratoria. So my overview tonight is not going to be exhaustive. I would encourage you, if you have follow-up questions, to email the Aquaculture Division, give us a call. check out our website. We also have redone, within the last, I think, week or so, our public participation page, and that goes into a lot of depth about process and how to engage in the review of sites. For those of you who are listening at home, you can find our website by going to, I think it's maine.gov/DMR. That'll take you to DMR's main page, and then you can navigate to the aquaculture page from there. And our email address also for those who are tuning in remotely is dmraquaculture@maine.gov. That is a general email account. It's monitored by staff. They see an email come in and they'll forward it out to the appropriate staff person and respond, will respond to any inquiries. Kind of just centering us back, so aquaculture, nuts and bolts, is, in my opinion, farming of the ocean, farming of the sea. It's different from land-based agriculture in the sense that in land-based agriculture, you're talking about folks who are farming, and it's usually done on a private property model, right? So a farmer might purchase land and start their farm that way, or maybe they're leasing private land from someone else. Aquaculture or sea farming is a little bit different, right? The ask is different because someone is saying, I want to grow marine organisms using certain techniques in coastal waters, and the state of Maine holds those coastal waters in public trust. And so the legislature many decades ago developed, in recognition of that these are sort of public shared spaces, developed a whole process of how individuals can go about making that ask and directing the state. This is how these applications will be processed out. So although it's a little bit different than land-based agriculture in a sense, there is a lot of robust opportunity for public review and public input, and that was, I think, very intentional in the design given the nature of the ask, because the state is temporarily divesting that for an individual or an entity to conduct aquaculture-related activities on a site. So the aquaculture's division's primary responsibility is to process aquaculture lease and license applications in accordance with statute and regulation, which includes a defined set of criteria. So many years ago, the legislature gave DMR the authority to license and lease the state's waters in accordance with a prescribed process. When I say license sites, I mean limited purpose aquaculture licenses. And these are annual licenses for sites that are very limited in scale. They expire December 31st each year. They can only be 400 square feet in size. You can only cultivate certain species on them. You can only use certain gear types. They're reviewed very much through a permit by rule process. And when I talk about leases, we're referring generally to either experimental leases, which those can be up to 4 acres in size and issued for up to a 3-year term. Experimental leases are not, if they're held for commercial purposes, they're not renewable. The vast majority of experimental leases in the state of Maine are for commercial purposes, so at the end of the 3-year term, if the holder of that experimental lease wants to continue operating that site, they then need to file a standard lease application. There's a provision of law that allows them to continue operating that experimental lease while the state processes their standard lease proposal. And then standard leases can be up to, these are individual sites, can be up to 100 acres in size and can be issued for up to a 20-year term. The state is not involved in site selection, though that type of decision is up to the respective applicant. LPAs, just to clarify, LPAs, which are those licenses, they can't be issued to companies, they can only be held by individuals. Leases can be held by individuals or companies, and again, how individuals or companies elect to apply or structure their operations, that's up to them. They submit their proposals to the state, and then the state evaluates all of them through an established process in consideration of a set criteria. One thing that I think is really important to highlight is that every proposal is evaluated in consideration of applicable decision criteria, which is established in law and rule. And the criteria include considerations like commercial and recreational fishing, navigation, riparian ingress and egress, and we do have those listed on the handout and on our website. So if you're wondering sort of what the full criteria look like, I would encourage you to check out those materials. We can't consider factors unrelated to the criteria. And I would just like to kind of take some time here to dispel some common, I think, misunderstandings or misconceptions that we routinely hear. So one thing that comes up is, that the department can consider general opposition or support to aquaculture when evaluating a lease or license site. And that's not the case. Every single site is evaluated against an established set of criteria, which, as I mentioned, are established in law and rule. And general opposition or support to aquaculture is not something that we can consider. So whenever you're submitting feedback on a site, whether it's through a comment period or testifying at a hearing, it's critical that you're addressing the respective decision criteria, because we can't consider anything kind of unrelated to that. And I'm sorry, I should have backed up and specified too that when we're talking about licenses and leases, there are many opportunities for public input, but the level of public input is going to vary, and it kind of aligns with the scale of the ask. So for example, for LPAs, so those limited purpose aquaculture sites that are licenses, there is no public hearing on those, but there is a comment period. And standards, which is an ask of potentially up to 100 acres for a 20-year term, those always go to a public hearing, and there is no comment period on those. So, when we talk about, participating, whether it's you're commenting on an LPA or you're coming out to a public hearing, it's critical that you address the respective criteria. Another thing that routinely comes up is that lease hearings are an opportunity to talk about general aquaculture policy or other issues related to aquaculture. So lease hearings, when those are required, so always on a standard application, and then they're at DMR's discretion for experimental leases unless we get 5 or more hearing requests during the comment period. So an experimental lease site, and again, that is, those can be up to 4 acres in size for up to a 3-year term. There's always going to be a comment period, and if a stakeholder wants to have a public hearing, they can certainly request one in writing during the comment period. But lease hearings, when they are required or held, they're more like a court proceeding than a public forum, and they are run under the Maine Administrative Procedures Act, which is a rule that or a law, that outlines how state agencies have to conduct adjudicatory proceedings. So if you've ever been to one or you come to one, it's going to feel a little bit more like court than a public forum like the one that we're in this evening. And the purpose of those hearings is to get testimony. So testimony meaning people are sworn in, they're under oath when they're giving feedback about a particular site, and to get evidence, tangible material about the specific application in consideration of the decision criteria. So it's an opportunity for stakeholders to explain maybe why they believe a specific site may pose an unreasonable interference with the lease decision criteria, including, as I mentioned, fishing, navigation, It's not a general meeting to discuss other considerations. Another thing that we hear is, that the department doesn't listen to feedback provided about proposals. The reality is that we review and consider all feedback received, but our consideration is really specific to the decision criteria. And what tends to happen is we often receive information that we can't use because it's either unrelated to the criteria or it lacks specificity to help inform a decision. And I have some examples of those to help kind of clarify that further. So an example of something that comes up that is not criteria tied is someone might submit a comment, or they might come out to a public hearing and they'll say, there are too many aquaculture sites in our town, so this proposal should be denied. In that example, the number of aquaculture sites in each town is not something that we can legally consider when we're evaluating a proposal. So this person provided feedback, but it's not something that we can use when we're trying to render a final decision on a given proposal. An example of something that invokes the criteria but lacks detail, and this is specific to navigation. So someone might write into the department, or they might come to a hearing and they'll testify or say, I've seen boating in the area, and that's it. But listen to the difference. So first statement, I see boating in the area. Second statement, from May through November, I see a variety of vessels traveling through and around the proposed lease site. These vessels include sailboats, lobster boats, and kayaks. There's a lot of vessel traffic from June through July, with an estimated 15 vessels traveling through the site each weekday. On the weekends, that number increases to 30 vessels. So both statements are communicating that boating occurs in the area, but the level of specificity in the second statement helps us better understand the types of vessels observed, the estimated frequency of traffic, the time of year the activity occurs, and where it occurs in relationship to the proposed site. And these types of details help us better apply evidence and testimony to the criteria. We also encourage stakeholders, again, whether they're submitting a comment or they're coming out planning to attend a lease hearing, to provide evidence in support of statements or comments that they're making. So examples of that could be photos of the vessels observed. If you're a boater and you keep track of your GPS routes, submitting that. If you maybe maintain a log of observed boating activity in the area, submitting that too. That's just a tie-in as an example with the navigation criteria. But with that, I really appreciate being here tonight and am looking forward to hearing from people's perspectives and opinions on aquaculture. Thanks.
Moderator,
Tom's gone.
meeting's dismissed.
Mayor, motion to adjourn.
So, who's next?
I'm not sure, where's this meeting?
This is how Damariscotta does it.
This is our normal special board meeting.
One of the things that strikes me is this is done piecemeal. There's no long-term plan as to what the river should have in the way of aquaculture, what it can handle, what the trade-offs are between other users in general, and what is to the welfare of the oyster people. Is there some plan as to 50% of the surface, 80% of the surface, 10% of the surface should be surface leases? And again,
Lost you, Tom.
what can the river handle? Has anybody done a study of that?
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm sorry, step out. Little nature crawl. Okay, so we're gonna go back to the agenda, so it's on me for right now. And I'm gonna, unfortunately, we're supposed to have some people from Darling here to talk about this, and they couldn't make it. And I just found out that today, or actually yesterday. So I'll give you something about what they said. They had a study that was a joint study with the Shellfish Commission or Committee at Damariscotta And generally, these were the results, okay? Nothing spectacular, but I just wanted, since it's on the agenda, I wanted to speak to it. Number one, the green crabs are varying in numbers, but they tend to peak in the summer, and lately they've been mostly around Westview, and there's 3 basic flat areas in the northern part of the Damariscotta where they did these studies. One is Chadbourne, one is Westview, and one is Days Cove. So the majority of green crabs are on the Westview side, which may correspond to the decline in soft-shelled clams in the same area. Wild oysters have been found in all 3 of those sites. No oyster spat has been found north of the Newcastle Bridge, which means no seedlings, natural seedlings. The oyster spat, which is the baby oysters basically, recruit to the recruit to the intertidal zone in the upper part of the estuary or the Damariscotta River, and where there are many oyster farms. And what else? They're finding adult wild oysters attached to rocks under the upper estuary south of the Damariscotta Bridge. So basically they put out certain protected boxes to try to make these counts, and you know, they did notice that the quahogs and basic little neck clams, if you will, before that are most prevalent in the Westview area, and the least prevalent is in that area is the soft-shell clams. So with that, we'll go back to the regular agenda, and we're going to talk about local results, and I think the first party we want to hear from is South Bristol. If they have anything they want to say, if their representative wants to speak, come up to the microphone and announce yourself, and any concerns that South Bristol might have, you can express. And then if anybody wants to respond, raise your hand and I'll recognize you.
Microphone and everything. My name is Adam Rice. I represent the Select Board of South Bristol, Maine. First of all, I'd like to thank DMR and our state representatives for coming out to speak with us tonight. I don't actually have 3 pages. It's double-spaced and big so I can read it. Our town began discussing aquaculture last year. The driving force behind it was concern from other users of the river. Lobstermen, shellfish harvesters who rely on their livelihood, as well as riparian landowners. The result of all this was a moratorium on new aquaculture leases for a period of 1 year voted in at our annual town meeting. Following the vote in March, we established an aquaculture committee. The committee is made up of 5 members. They represent lobstermen, shellfish harvesters, the harbor master, a member of the public, and an aquaculture lease holder. They've met monthly since April. It's been a productive process and revealed much that we didn't know about the aquaculture industry. We have recognized that standard lease applications receive much oversight and public comment. In contrast, leases known as LPAs or experimental did not receive the same scrutiny. LPAs are not required to post a bond that is used to cover any cleanup or remediation cost should the lease fail. It also appears that LPA numbers have increased greatly. One number we have found suggests that in 2007 the state of Maine had 44 LPAs, and by 2021 there are 800 or more statewide. It's points like that have led to the question, what is the carrying capacity of our river? We as a town want to see our aquaculture growers thrive, but the concerns about balance in our marine environment are real. Navigation and landowner rights are also a concern. Technology in aquaculture has taken something that used to exist on the bottom of the river and brought it to the surface for all to see and navigate. As a community, we don't want to see aquaculture go the way of so many other fisheries, following boom to bust mentality. We would ask that DMR consider consulting with small coastal towns like ours regarding the concerns of our residents and other waterfront users in the consideration of future leases. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, then Waldeboro?
Glenn, you go first.
Knock yourself out, girl.
Do you guys want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. So if somebody told me when I took the job as town manager in Waldeboro, little girl from New Jersey, that I would be delving into the oystering and aquaculture in Maine, I would have told them they were crazy. This started because our Shellfish committee that is very active in Waldeboro had concerns when we received a lease request. We got some calls from residents on the back river and they said there's a navigation issue. It got brought up at the Shellfish committee and our shellfish harvesters were very concerned. Damariscotta has oysters. And we are the soft shell clam capital of Maine. And they are the best. And we have 134 people that are residents that make their living off of that river. And some of those residents are our most vulnerable residents. Literally, some people clam because that's what they have for dinner in Waldeboro. And they're very passionate. My clamming community is very passionate. And that led to the recommendation that we go to the select board and ask for a moratorium because we want to know what the capacity of the Madomic is. Our clamming community has spent the last 15 years cleaning up the river, and it's very important. They've invested time and effort into making our river cleaner than it's been, and as though at times it feels, I think, to the clamming community, just like sometimes it feels to the lobstering community, that one new thing or another fishery takes precedence over them. And our select board took it very seriously. And since our moratorium was adopted, we're working towards a capacity study for the Madomic estuary because we want to know, what do we have? What can the river support? One of the problems we've had is a couple of the scientists we've conducted, we can tell you where the leases should go. We don't want you to tell us where the leases should go. We want you to tell us what's in the river and what the river can support. So for some people, it's already a foregone conclusion that you have to have the lease. One of the things, too, I think that's been interesting is, a lot of these clammers have a history in this area, and we kept hearing, well, I used to dig in Damariscotta, or the Damariscotta diggers are now Waldeboro diggers because the clams don't exist anymore. And I don't know the science behind that, but I do think that as a whole, the state and other people have to start listening. These are people who make their living on the river. They get to go out there every day and look at this amazing river and God's coloring book, and we have to listen to them. It's not just numbers. I mean, I think your numbers are great, but it's really not just about numbers. It's about what's happening out there and having people listen to the people that are there every day. And it's about listening to the people who are making a living. One of the things I hear all the time, well, they could just work for an oyster farm. Well, let me tell you, Glenn Melvin isn't going to go work for an oyster farm. He'll be out of work. And you wouldn't want him working for you. Because they're a high-spirited group. But so, we do this, and then what happens is incredible. I start getting phone calls from all over the state. All over the state. From, all the way south to the tippy top of the north, and people were concerned. And they're concerned, not only about oysters, I don't want to beat up oysters because I love oysters, but fish farms, other things, like how does this happen? Then you have an organization come forward and say, well, you know, we can help you with this moratorium. And that's where the moratorium idea came from. And it was worth the effort to have conversation. A lot of people feel that leasing public land for 20 years is difficult, and I understand that's legislation, and we have to work with our legislators to change that. But I will say this about the DMR. I'm going off here, so just bear with me. We're one of the towns with the moratorium, and I found out about the guidance in an email that went out to all the towns. Nobody personally called me from the DMR. Nobody sent me a letter and said, or my own like not personal, but town email and said, hey, you're one of the towns that did this. I would think that if we're one of the towns that adopted a moratorium, it wouldn't go out on a blast email. So communication, I'm glad you're listening. Glad, because that's part of the problem. And I understand what you're saying. When you stood up here and said, it's so many boats at a time, you get a resident who gets an official letter about a lease, they're not going to know what they're doing. They're not going to know that they have to, and nor are they keeping a log of how many vessels are in the area. So part of the problem, I think, that exists is bureaucracy. Sorry. But you're here, and that's great, and I'm glad you're watching over us, but we're in the trenches. And there's a disconnect. We write laws and policies, and the DMR implements forms and things like that to follow, or the rule of law. It should be, if you're asking for public comment, easier. You shouldn't have to keep a log of what vessels and how many and what times. So although you're saying you can't just say, because it doesn't meet criteria, there's a lot of boating, that might be all you can get out of that person. But I would hope that there's a phone call, when that's read, to the person who took the time to comment and say, so tell me about what boating is in the area. Maybe that's not allowed with the rules, but it should be. Because you're asking laymen to comment on something that you've designed a form for. So there needs to be some common sense here, and believe me, my select board makes decisions too that I have to implement, and sometimes it's hard. So I get where you're coming from, but since you're in the listening mode, I think there has to be better communication. And it starts, honestly, with the towns. And I'll be honest, I had a meeting with you guys. I forget when it was, back in the spring before we implemented our moratorium. And it was great. But I hadn't heard anything since personally. You have my email, and that communication is a two-way street, and it just should be easier. And I think the towns need to be included more. And I do think that, again, everybody has to understand, you're talking about livelihoods. And in the Madomic, we have our lobstermen, we have elvers, we have people who pogie, we have our shellfish community. Glenn, I did not forget you. I'm not going to forget you. So it's not just, one thing, but we have to figure out what is in our river and what can it support. And starting that conversation by saying, no, we're going to tell you what you can support. We need to know what we can support. And you need to know, as the regulating authority, I would think that should be a requirement of what's the capacity study of every river before you start making these decisions. Again, I have nothing against the Damariscotta River. I love the oysters. But we're a pristine, in Waldoboro right now, untouched river from, at least in the Waldoboro confines, with leases. And we'd like to keep it that way. It's worth a 10-year study. It's worth a 10-year study to say, hey, we're pristine, we want to keep it that way. Let's see what actually happens with our soft shell clams. And I'm sure Glenn wants to follow up, because I'm going to stop now and let Glenn continue.
Okay. You want me to take it?
You
can take it from there.
All right. Hold on to your seats.
Yeah, hold on to your seats.
I'm very shy.
He's very, very shy.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Damariscotta for letting us voice our opinions, one way or the other, and we all have them. I know that. I've definitely got mine. I'm a shellfish harvester for 46 years. I started in 1976. Man, that's old as hell, isn't it? It's 1976. And I'm standing here straight. That's not bad. That's not bad. I think what we have to get to, what we have to listen to, I've heard Damariscotta boast their numbers and their aquaculture scheme. We don't have any interest in following you or being you, we being Waldoboro. That's not a path for every town to follow. You may consider it a success story. We may consider it a disaster. We don't want our river to look like yours. We don't want the navigation problems. We don't want the fishing problems. We don't want the possibility that you killed off your clams. The chair of your committee digs Waldoboro because it's better clamming. So yeah, isn't that amazing? I guess I hold a personal grudge because he let Damariscotta go to Damariscotta's way, and I never saw resistance. Waldoboro shellfish is so big and has such influence that we're not afraid to speak our minds and protect our industry. $2 million industry in Waldoboro. 150 diggers, if you want to count the out-of-towners. We want to protect that. We don't want to risk that for anything. Rather, oysters and clams can coexist. You can argue that forever. That would change from one cove to another. You couldn't do a test or anything to ever prove it because what worked on one side may not work on the other side. And Waldoboro's not even willing to risk it. It's not a path we even want to go down, and we think we should be able to protect that right. We want to keep our river. I see kids tubing in our river all the time, everywhere. I see people duck hunting. I'm one of them. We duck hunt all the coves. We see pogie boats. I saw 6 in one half-hour stretch here last spring. We got lobsters, as she said. We have alvarezes. Our river is very busy, and handing it to a private entity or one individual or a small group of it is not on our agenda at all. And we are willing to fight with everything we have and every resource we have. If it takes it to court or whatever, then so be it. Because we want the state of Maine to recognize what we're fighting for. The fact that towns up and down the coast are launching moratoriums, the state should put its head down. Your towns are turning on you. I've seen 100 lobster boats in a line. Your state fisheries are turning on you. This is horrifying, absolutely horrifying. But I'll stick with Waldoboro. I'll stay out of the politics part of it. We want to protect our river. And you know what's funny is I stand up here and everybody's going to hate Glenn or think Glenn is anti-aquaculture. Waldoboro has the largest aquaculture site in the state of Maine. It's called American Unagi. They grow eels. But it was done, you don't hear about it because it was done the right way. The lady that started American Unagi came before the Shellfish Committee first to see if she'd be welcome here. First, to see if we'd accept her and her business or what her influence would be on us and if we had a problem with it. American Unagi is 5 miles upstream. I think it's actually a little more than that. So they take no tidal waters. They don't take your coves. They don't change your navigation. Our kids can still tube. We can still fish. We can still catch stripers. We can do everything that the Potomac has done for years and years and years and that we're trying to protect. So American Unagi, Sarah, give me hell for that, took off. It's a great aquaculture site. It's a success story for aquaculture. I have no problem with aquaculture operating out of a building or someplace away from the ocean. I struggle giving public property to anybody for leases, for this, for that. Call it a personal endeavor, call it what you want, but I think you'll find that a common approach statewide. Again, I appreciate everybody listening to at least our view, whether you agree with it or whether you don't, and giving us the time at the mic. Are there any questions or anything anybody wants to throw?
I have a question.
Knock yourself out.
As a clammer, do you come across many green crabs in the Madonna?
It comes and goes. It comes and goes. I've had years where when the water came in, I was washing one hod. By the time I went to the other one and lifted it up, it was solid green crabs. But that was 5 years ago. I would tell you this year we're actually better. It's the damn fishing sine wave. Everybody likes to overreact to a bad year or over-celebrate to a good year. If we have a great year, don't go out and take loans out, man, and spend all your money. If we have a bad year, don't run up and down the road screaming that the earth is burning and all hell's breaking loose. I've just been here too long. I've seen too much. I scuba dove for 12 years. I dove from the Isle of Howe down to Rutherford Island. I can tell you what Matinicus looks like. I can tell you what Manhegan looks like underneath it. I've seen so many things come and go. I've seen every cove in Waldoboro be successful, every clam, shellfish cove. I've seen every one of them die off. So it's not like we have a place that we're not using or that we could put something and it would be absolutely fine and out of the way. Everything has a high, everything has a low. And then as you've probably read, I have a problem with man taking and putting a whole bunch of any product in any place thinking it's not going to affect what's already there. There's no way. Anytime you put an abundance of anything in any area, somebody else is going to pay. And I don't want that happening to Waldoboro shellfish. I've done this for 46 years, man. I want to keep my job for now. And I'm not going to invite a threat to do that. I would hope the DMI would respect that opinion and that view. Sometimes I think they do. Sometimes I don't think they give a rat's ass. But it is where we are, and it's who we are, and we are real. If I say something that offends somebody, it's because I am real and honest, and I have nothing to hide or an agenda to follow. I appreciate your time, guys.
I think we can make a short movie out of that speech. That was pretty damn good. It's too bad you're so bashful, that's all. Yeah, okay, so, Newcastle.
Can I ask a question first?
Sure, yeah.
Waldoboro, do you have someone lined up to do the capacity studies separate? Is it state-based or?
Well, we're trying to get somebody through UMO to do this study.
Okay.
A professor that will take on the project. Part of our issue has been, again, we need to find somebody, and it would be great if we could get some state funding to do it because it's expensive.
Hey, anybody from Newcastle want to speak?
Sorry, we didn't know that this was going to be a part of the forum.
Okay. Yes.
Should I come to the mic?
Yeah, you're Newcastle?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just had a question. My name's Sandy Paulson. I'm on the Shellfish Committee for Damariscotta, Newcastle, and I wanted to, well, recently I learned, I'm new on the committee, that when somebody applies for an LPA, they're required to at least try to come to the committee and get get approval from the committee to move forward in that LPA process. So that was news to me, and so we reviewed a couple of those LPAs. But I wanted to see if DMR could speak to the role of the Shellfish Committee in that process, and maybe as an opportunity for public participation at that level.
So, speaking for, well, I think programmatically in general, we always encourage any applicant, regardless of what site they might be applying for, whether that's an LPA or a lease, to talk to the harbor master, to talk to shellfish committees, to engage with the municipality to get a better sense of that local knowledge and to better understand how Shellfish Committee or harvesters are utilizing the area. The law, so that's what we encourage. The law for LPAs requires an applicant to get the signature of the Shellfish Committee if the site is in the intertidal and the municipality has a shellfish program in accordance with statute, so 6671. So again, that would be for sites that are in the intertidal. It would also require sign off from the Shellfish Committee. And then there's also a requirement in addition to that, kind of regardless of the site characteristics, so whether it's intertidal, subtidal, an LPA applicant also has to get sign off from the harbor master. And if the community is not served by a harbor master, then regulation says, or I believe it's another municipal official. The law and the handouts that are circulating now goes into greater detail about municipal engagement in the leasing and licensing process. But the law requires sometimes certain sign-off or consultation with the municipality, but municipalities have broad discretion in how they want to structure the review of respective sites. So, we're generally aware that some communities, like I think Harpswell, when they get LPA applications in, they publicly post them on their website and have kind of an internal comment and review process through through a process that they manage. I'm also generally aware that some communities have set times and set meetings where, like, the harbor committee or maybe the select board will review a proposal together and provide input to the department after that process is completed. But yeah, and like I said, if anybody has further follow-up questions, you can always reach out to us via email or phone. But
I've got a comment, because I think I discussed it with you, but I got a notice on November 13th that 87 LPAs were going to be renewed on the Damariscotta River, and they were going to be, absent any negative comment, be approved on November 30th. There's no way you can look at 87 LPAs and come up with a comment period or get people involved.
so to clarify, I know the notice. I know the notice that you're talking about, and the department. That was a Gov delivery communication that went out to towns about the LPA renewal process. And we sent information out, I believe, in October, because we did do some rulemaking, some changes around that. And so we notified communities in October of some of those changes and about the LPA renewal process itself. So to your...
This was a notice that the comment period is between November 13th and November 30th for 87 LPAs.
So, yes, we put out a notice that alerted towns to the LPA, so those limited purpose aquaculture licenses, they can be renewed each year after December 31st. And so there's an opportunity to provide comment on the renewal of those respective sites. So the agency processed notice of that, so that towns or other stakeholders could submit comments if they had feedback about respective LPA sites. They have until November 30th to submit those comments to us. We're taking those comments in, reviewing those comments in consideration of applicable renewal criteria, and then making a decision on those. It's not instant.
Maybe I'm not making myself clear.
Tom, I think you're clear. You're saying it's not enough time to review.
Absolutely, 87 licenses, and on top of that, there's no detail about the licenses. You have to go to the map and dig down to find out where they're located, how big they are, what they're doing, all that stuff. It's impossible, you can't do it. You have to put an army on it. Yeah.
Yes, we feel that pain.
Yeah. Yep.
Just because you said you feel that pain, is that because you don't have enough staff? I mean, I look at all these, I know what we have to do in our little small town to keep it, all the wheels going. And I look at if 87 application or renewals are just in Damariscotta, do you even have enough staff to do that?
Well, I'll answer you this way, it's a big program, and
Yeah.
there's a lot to do, and people are very busy. And we do try to streamline things so that we have enough time to allocate to every demand that we have.
Because we've had a pending application in Waldeboro, which is what sparked this whole thing, and it's still pending, and it's been years.
That's a fact, not a question.
Well, it's just that you're both very brave to show up here and take some heat, and sometimes the legislators need to hear that because, and I know some of them already know this, but that's a heavy lift. Aside from it being too small of a window, it literally is impossible too if you don't have enough staff.
Well, also, as I said, there's no detail about what the LPAs are. So let's say you're just getting the notices for the first time. You have to do your own digging, just to find out how to do it. Because you have to have some knowledge in advance to figure out how to go to the map, to dig down, and then look at the data and decide what they're doing there and how big a footprint they have and what their purpose is, whatever. To get that to the general public, that's an impossible task.
One of the things that we're doing is in 2024, we're developing a municipal training program for marine resources. So there are a few places where municipalities interact with DMR on marine resources, aquaculture just being one of them. So there's also obviously shellfish ordinances, and there's also alewives, and then dams and things like that. And so we're trying to develop this training program so that we can get like town clerks and shellfish committee members and select board people to come and talk about the details of how you do these processes and try to provide some training. So we're working in that direction.
Good.
But we hear your frustration.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. I'm glad we were able to clarify that.
Okay. Any other questions of Amanda?
I'm up here, you sure?
Well, I'm sure it won't be the last one. There's something to go further.
Can you just clarify, you said to sign off, is a signature equal to approval or just we've reviewed it?
Yeah, great question. What the signature is doing is, and this language is in regulation, is the signature is saying, in the the example of the harbor, in the harbor master's opinion, this site won't interfere with the LPA criteria, which is navigation, commercial and recreational fishing, and riparian ingress and egress. So in that individual's opinion, it's not necessarily the only thing that we can consider and review, but it's part of that process. So.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
If a lease or license application does not have that signature, does that prohibit the application from moving forward?
No. So what can happen is if the signature only applies to LPAs. There is a review and consulting process that happens with municipalities on the leasing side, but just to be clear, the signature piece applies to LPAs. So if a signature is withheld, what happens, and again, this is in regulation, the applicant can still submit their proposal to DMR, but they request that we review the basis for the signature being withheld. And so in those cases, we would follow up with the municipality and talk with them about why they withheld the signature. If it wasn't criteria tied, then we go to, the next step in that process is going to the local marine patrol officer in the area and getting their assessment, and then we render a decision accordingly. We might, if we find that it was withheld with basis, then the license is denied. If it wasn't withheld with basis, then we still may issue it, but there is a couple other steps of review that have to happen. Yep.
Do you know offhand how many LPAs you don't renew in a given year?
I don't know that number off the top of my head. But if something can follow up and see if we can't, we might have that. I just don't know off the top of my head.
One more question, if I may.
Sure.
How many of the LPAs, put it another way, how many LPAs could an individual own or have with your department?
So you can only, an individual, and again, these are, because they're licenses, they're only held by individuals. You can only hold 4.
So of the 800 plus that you've issued, it's conceivable that 200 people have an interest in, or more, but have an interest in those LPAs.
Yep, correct, yep.
Yes, back here. You want to come up and state your name? Jeff, yeah, Jeff.
You know,
Didn't you raise your hand?
everyone else got to just ask the question.
I saw you raise your hand.
I did. So did I just had a question, Amanda, if you could describe the pre-application meeting and the scoping session that goes along with the standard lease, because from our personal experience, that's a tremendous area where input is received and alterations are made in the process to accommodate some of the concerns that I think have been raised.
Yeah. Jeff is talking about pre-application meetings and scoping sessions, which are a requirement for standard leases. And just as a reminder, standard leases are sites that can be up to 100 acres in size and may be issued for a 20-year term. And so a pre-application meeting is required before any application is submitted. It's a meeting between the applicant, DMR, and the municipality, and any municipal official can attend that meeting. And the purpose of that is for the applicant to present their tentative plans to the municipality and DMR, and for the municipality to have an opportunity, upfront before an investment in putting together an application, to say, to talk about any concerns they might have with the proposal. Let's say, for example, someone is proposing a site and the municipality says, well, we're generally aware that there's a lot of recreational vessel traffic in that area, and that sort of thing. And then after the pre-application meeting, then the applicant puts together a draft application, and that draft application outlines their tentative plans. Like, it's putting idea to paper, and the draft application is going to include things like the schematics of the site, an overview of operations, really what the kind of the nuts and bolts of what they're thinking. And then they submit that to the department. We review it. We're reviewing it to make sure that it's mapped correctly and that sort of thing. And then when we deem it complete, the applicant then goes out and schedules and has a scoping session. And the scoping session is a public meeting, and it's an opportunity for stakeholders to provide feedback about the draft application prior to the applicant eventually submitting a final application to the agency and a public hearing. Because the further along you get sort of in the leasing process, you can't, given notice requirements and a variety of other considerations, an applicant can't make changes to their final application after it's been deemed complete and noticed. So the law is giving opportunity, I think, overall on the standard leasing side, opportunity for stakeholder input and engagement prior to getting to a final application and eventual public hearing.
Thank you for being here. Mark Gallagher with Protect Maine's Fishing Heritage. You mentioned earlier that DMR was going to set up some listening sessions throughout the state. I think 4 years ago, DMR opposed a bill that created a work study group, so I'm glad that the DMR is going to do that. But I was wondering, what has changed? What's the impetus of doing that now as opposed to in the past? Has something changed over the past 4 years in your mind or DMR's mind? And then secondly, you talked about the restrictions that you have because of the criteria through the application process. Is DMR now thinking that they would like to support, potentially new criteria that includes, as you mentioned, view shed and other areas of concern that have been brought up in various different application processes.
Yeah. So I can only speak to kind of my experience at the helm with the aquaculture division. So since April 2023, and I think since coming into this role, we're hearing a lot from stakeholders about wanting to have conversations, and that these are kind of happening coast-wide. And so for us, and we hear about these when we go to lease hearings and that sort of thing, and people maybe not feeling like they have a vehicle to talk about some of their concerns and whatnot. And so the idea for these listening sessions would be facilitated conversations that we can have statewide in various communities across the state. What I think for us at this point, or for me, I will be very curious to, again, listening, learning, hearing that feedback, and then maybe taking some of those inputs that come out of those conversations and thinking about how we can make some changes. I don't know, Cole, as our bureau director, if you have anything to add to that? No. Okay.
Camden Rice, Brunswick Shellfish Harvester. I was curious, I was at the Brunswick meeting, and you guys stated that you're doing literature review. What's the extent of that literature review, and what's the goal?
Yeah, I'm gonna have Cole speak to that a little bit, if you don't mind, Cole, just talking about.
There are several people here aware of this. There was a bill in the Marine Resources Committee last session, and as a result of that discussion that happened around that bill, the Legislative Marine Resources Committee asked us to do a literature review of the relationship between softshell clams and oysters in the environment. And so we're working on that literature review. There is a lot of peer-reviewed publications out there that addresses this particular interaction between clams and oysters, but also lots of other types of shellfish. So there's an extensive amount out there that we're working through now, and then we'll write sort of a summary paper that we'll present to the Marine Resources Committee in February.
Just to follow up, shouldn't that have been done before they decided to give out leases in areas with wild harvest? And also there's no criteria, I think, that gives a certain range or, size between the wild harvest and the oyster farms. So I think that probably should have been done before, or it should at least be considered as a criteria.
Do you wanna?
Well, I guess what I want to say that I've sort of been thinking about in some of these conversations is that I think people keep turning to DMR because some of you know us, we're accessible, we're in communities, but some of the questions that you're asking are not questions that we can develop answers for. We are part of the executive branch of government, and for the aquaculture leasing process, we're provided laws and we create some regulations around the authorities that the laws allow, and then we implement those laws and regulations. And so often people talk to us like, you're pro-aquaculture, you're pro-clamor, like putting us in the position of trying to pick sides or making it look like we're picking sides. And we're really not. We are a neutral party. We are implementing the laws and regulations in each area that we do. We do it, in my bureau, I can speak for myself, we do it for public health, for shellfish sanitation. We do it for municipal shellfish management. We're now doing it in aquaculture. And equity amongst all the people of Maine is the primary concern that we have. That's what we do at DMR. So I think sometimes questions like the one that was just asked are questions that maybe should go to a legislator or somebody like that who's thinking maybe at a higher level about what do all the people of Maine want.
Thank you.
Cameron has a response.
Just additionally, hi everyone, I'm Senator Cameron Reddy for District 13. I'm also the chair of the Marine Resources Committee. I was lucky enough to work with Representative Crafts this past session, and next session I got Representative Simmons. So we're all right here. just a little clarification. So, for example, that literature review that was just mentioned, having to do with asking the DMR to look up all the research that exists between the effects of soft-shell clams and oysters on each other and together. That was done actually in response because there's been so many concerns with the aquaculture licensing process. We're just trying to gather as much information as possible. So moving forward, you know, when you're looking at the criteria that the DMR is using, executive branch, that the DMR is using, if you want to change some of that criteria, you come over to us, the legislative over here. If you want to add a criteria, change a criteria, modify something, we can put in a bill. We can try and make some of these things happen, right? Because they can't use a criteria that doesn't exist or make one. We can make one. Tell us what you want. Okay.
And I did just want to clarify too, there was a gentleman earlier, when I first gave, he had asked a question, and I think the question kind of went along this lines, like the process feels very site specific, and it didn't feel to him like there was this overarching plan and framework. And I want to acknowledge that it is the process that we currently have that we implement, is site specific and criteria driven to those sites. You know, there's not kind of a plan that the department is coming up with for each body of water within the state. So
I would add to that, I've spoken to at least two DMR senior people, and they expressed concerns about that very issue in terms of concentrations in various waterways, that they felt that in certain cases that they were over-concentrated, but they can't do anything because they are following the criteria.
Must have talked to them off the record.
There's a whip in the back there. Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks.
Come on up. Okay. Some voice, we're recording, so some voices don't carry.
Yeah, thanks. My name's Dana Morris. I'm with the Maine Sea Grant Program and UMaine Cooperative Extension. I work out of the Darling Marine Center. And I'm not making a comment to any particular point, but a little bit of context. So the discussion that we're all having here is another one in a long series, really. I think it was 1975, the first lease regulations were put in place, 75 or 73, I think. And regulations have evolved over time and lots of different discussions over time. The first leasing or protections for oyster plantings that I know about was about 1859. 20 years, 30 years after the state of Maine was founded or separated from Massachusetts. And oddly enough, if you planted oysters and someone poached your oysters, the person doing the poaching got a much more severe penalty if they did it at night versus at day. So the legislature and people in the communities were thinking about this kind of activity back then. So I just want to note that this is it's like not a new concept, but we are here at this point in time because of the interests and the concerns there that are being expressed, and it is a part in a process. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, yes.
My name's Bill Mook. I own Mook Seed Farm, and I guess I would like to talk a little bit about the literature study that you guys are doing, and ask you the question, you know, are you just looking at species interaction, or are you looking at the species interaction with the environment? Because having, I think Glenn and I both have been observing our waterways on almost geologic scale. I've been doing this for almost over 40 years. And there's been profound changes that are occurring in the environment. And as somebody who's reared billions and billions of shellfish, including soft-shell clams and bay scallops, and all different kinds, all of these changes affect the reproductive success of the animals that we're seeing. These changes are in the environment. We're seeing a completely different temperature regime from when it started. We're seeing changes in carbonate chemistry, increasing acidity as the pH drops. That has a profound effect on larvae after big rain events where you get a lot of runoff. So I could tick down through a whole list of things And my point is that you're not going to get to an answer about whether oysters are killing all the soft-shell clams unless you understand how these species are being affected by all these environmental changes.
Yeah, I think.
And I don't know if that's part of your literature, so I'm not sure how it would be.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, to be honest with you, if you really want to understand this question of whether oyster farms are killing all the soft-shell clams, you need to look at whether the brood stock clams are spawning and whether, you know, that's been affected by some of these changes. You need to look at whether they're producing larvae that get, you know, with eggs that get fertilized and develop normally through the larval phase, which is a few weeks, you know, in Maine waters. You need to look at whether, you know, they're developing normally and whether they're setting. And just a little anecdotal evidence, when there are clam larvae in the water, they set all over our oysters. They form byssal threads just like mussels do. And, you know, they become a fouling organism actually. And so if oysters were this black hole that everybody seems to think, that wouldn't happen.
What about the concentration, though, in a given area of a large number of any species having an effect,
Well,
negative effect on another?
So just to put things in further context, if you, each oyster grow cage is 20 square feet. There are probably around 7,000 cages on the Damariscotta River. Does anybody have a guess of how many acres that is?
160.
3.5 acres. If you take all those cages and put them together, you know, end to end, side to side,
Well,
and make a big surface flowing rectangle, that's what you're talking about.
Right, the leases are 160 acres.
Yeah, but my point is that it's 160 acres of coastal water that's being leased, but the actual year is occupying a very small fraction of that.
Yes.
I'd just like to clarify too that we can debate what's good, what's bad, what affects what, and play the biology game. We're just not willing to take the chance, period. We know where we are, we're happy where we are. Why would we risk learning after the fact and then find out, well, it does do that, sorry, we killed the predominant. We're just not willing to even take the risk. If other rivers decide they want to do it, knock yourselves out. We're just not in. And I do wish Damariscotta get the diggers out of our river because they don't have any clams in theirs. So it's great as you say it is. Take them back.
Okay, let's go back to the schedule. I want to keep this thing moving because I don't think everybody wants to be here all night. Damariscotta is hosting this because, believe it or not, even though we're the largest in the state, we're sort of behind in getting up to speed on this. And so I don't know if our chairman wants to speak on behalf of any issues for Damariscotta, but we're learning here, our board is learning here, and I'll give them the opportunity if they want to speak, but what do you think, Darryl? Do you have anything?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on behalf of the town of Damariscotta. I'll come up. Josh, you got a question?
I got a question too.
I'll come up here. I think most of you know me. I'll admit that I've lived here all my life and I know very little about all these industries. So this is kind of an eye-opener for me. I'm looking at it as an opportunity to hear from everybody. I know nothing about, I see a lot of the aquaculture guys, you know me, and some of the other guys around, and I know very little about this. So it's an interesting opportunity to learn a little bit more about the industries that survive on the river. Josh has a question?
Yeah, I have
maybe?
a question. Years ago, we used to have a raft race that every 4th of July we'd be scooting down. A few people get together when I was little kids and do a raft race going down the river, and be some bottles and cans floating in the river, and things are cleaned up since then. But I guess my question is Julie kind of hit on this earlier about sustainability, and we want to do a study, and are there grant money available? I've heard Glenn speak on what's going on over there with his clammers, and he's kind of saying what's going on over here a little bit too. So I'm trying to find out, and my question was a fact-finding mission, and we asked Tom to kind of look into this as the board. What is the sustainability of the Damariscotta River, and how can everybody in every industry coexist? And that was one of the biggest things for me. I was born and raised in Damariscotta. I have multiple people that I know are in the oyster industry, that are clammers, navigation. You know, and I'd like to know if we could team up again with Waldoboro. We've done studies and grant applications to study the Madomic River and the Damariscotta River and talk about sustainability and what is the best option for everybody. And I'd like to see if the state could come up with some funds, because we've got two beautiful areas that we need to make sure that are protected and that we can thrive and people can work on these rivers and have entertainment and go tubing, Glenn. So that's where, yeah, that's where I'm going, and that's the big thing for me. Where do we find the balance? What's the balance? What's the perfect answer to this question? Somebody find us some money so we can find a grant.
I mean, as long as I can bring it up at our select board meeting, I have three of them here, but they can't make a decision, because I didn't advertise the meeting. You guys did, but they've never shied away from trying to get grant money and working with people.
You know, just finding the balance for all associated parties, you know, and I think that's the best thing we can do.
I think that's particularly pertinent in the sense that a lot of the licenses are going out 20 years, and we're going to talk a little bit about what DMR is doing on long-range planning when they're giving out these 20-year leases, and how they can project what, you know, the climate change is, and what the other uses are going to, how they're going to grow, and how they're going to be interacting, and all that kind of stuff. Because I think when you're sort of putting a marker out there for 20 years, and not knowing, unless you do know, and if you do, please share it, you know, what's the river going to be like in 20 years?
What's the world gonna be like in 20 years?
Yeah, that's true. I won't be here.
That's a great question.
But I'm worried about my grandkids. You know?
Yeah, and I don't know if, we have two fire chiefs that are here tonight, and we've had a call on the river at night. And so there was a rescue operation, so if you could touch base on that, John. I think sorry to throw you under the bus, but I was there and I want them to talk about some of the things that we've come into.
They were going to be on the list, going to get the harbor strippers, so we already had one, but
Thank you.
I haven't called all the categories yet, so he's one of the categories that's here now, so.
Like Josh was mentioning, so on the Damariscotta River, for any water rescue calls that go out within the town limits of Damariscotta or Newcastle, our two departments respond as one. We've done that for at least 15 or 20 years. And we had one such incident where a boat crashed into something, and a female occupant was pretty severely hurt. So we responded, we brought CLC out with us. One of the challenges is it was at night, and the other one is trying to find a drifting boat that was disabled, and then finding where we can meet up with the ambulance. Chief Stevens in Newcastle found a place on the Newcastle side where they could get the ambulance. We brought a couple medics out with us. We located the boat, and we then had to found that it was going to be best not to move the woman, so the medics went in the boat and we had to tow the boat. And in the process of trying to make our way across the river, it was just lease site after lease site after lease site that we could only see, and we have huge lights on our rescue boat, we could only see when we were almost running into them. It was raining, it was really dark, and there's almost no way to be able to see these floating crates until you're right up on them. So one of the things, and I'm trying not to play how many should be on the river, but it would be really nice if there were reflective pieces that were put on there, so you could at least navigate safely. And you know, we've got 4 people in a boat that we're towing. We're trying to navigate our way with the tide, and it's a flat bottom boat, so towing with a flat bottom boat's not very good either. But that's what really opened our eyes up to some of the challenges, because there are so many on the river. And the other thing is it would be nice to have some sort of emergency action plan for the different lease sites. So, you know, we have the 911 system for roads, but on, bodies of water, it's not really thought about. Usually maybe have a GPS location, but these are work sites. There's, a high likelihood using equipment that someone could get trapped in the equipment, could get hurt, and that emergency services have to respond out there. So having some sort of, again, I'm really just interested in Newcastle and Damariscotta, but having the lease owners have some sort of emergency action plan where they identify who the holder is, what type of equipment, what type of rescue we might need to effect, because that's a whole lot different when we have to go out on the water than when we can have the truck that has all the tools and go up to a land-based location. So those were, I think, our two thoughts. Did you have anything else?
Any other emergency personnel? Yes?
Not emergency personnel, but I'm Chris Davis. I'm part of one of the oyster farms. And this is news to me, and it's obviously a concern. Suggest without too much difficulty, come up with a GPS layer for your emergency vessels. And so that you, on your GPS, could actually see all the outlines of all the surface gear. Bottom gear, the bottom pieces wouldn't matter. But I think that might be a solution to help.
Yeah, I think with the bottom gear, it would still be nice to know and have a location, because you're using more equipment to bring stuff up on that, so there might be a higher risk of someone getting trapped in a hauler or something. So.
Yes. Yeah, Sebastian Bell from the Maine Aquaculture Association. Just to follow up on this thread, we're in the process of reviewing and updating our BMPs, and safety is absolutely at the top of our list. So if you guys can give us some recommendations, in fact, we'll send you our BMPs for you to review. You can give us feedback, particularly on water evacuation and worker safety and identification of sites. We would love that. That would be very helpful, and we would build that into our BMPs. So thank you for that. It's a great suggestion.
All right.
Very good. I'm the harbor master for Newcastle and Damariscotta, and if you ever have a problem like that, you can call me. I know the river extremely well, even in the dark. I can help them.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not necessarily navigating the river. It's trying to, we don't necessarily say, okay, we know we're going to this point. We know we're going to this point. It's an evolving plan, and as you try to finally find a place that an ambulance can get close enough to offload a patient, hopefully this doesn't happen very often, but it's still to us brought up challenges of, we do go out quite regularly at night for stranded boats or other things, and to not have reflectors on the surface gear to be able to see it is not just a problem for emergency responders, but for navigation on the river altogether. So it seems like it would be a pretty inexpensive tool that would improve everyone's access. So
I would add that the lease markers by statute required to have reflectors, and so that on the corners. I agree.
Yeah, but the lease, like you said, the lease is not where the surface gear is, right? I mean,
Well, no, the
but it's not the
gear's in the lease, but I think your point is really a good one. There could be more night visibility that.
Yeah, I mean, you said there's only really 3.5 acres or whatever of gear, and there's 160 acres.
Put it in one lease.
Right, so we can still go across the lease.
So all the leases we have lanes that provide access to the shore. That was something that we negotiated with the harbor committee when we applied for the lease.
Yeah.
If you guys want to do drills,
yep,
we're more than open to that. We've been doing them in Copscook Bay with oil spill folks' responses for years, and more than willing to do that on a local basis with the fire department or whomever. I mean, we would welcome that.
Yeah, and anytime we have an oil spill, we report it to DMR, and they're supposed to make a determination if it's significant enough to alert the oyster farmers. So, or all the aquaculture, but
we're involved with the oyster, with the oil spill drills, not because of us, but because of the big refineries refinery on the Canadian side, and so we are actually viewed as a force multiplier to help them respond to oil drills. It's not because we're at risk, it's because they're at risk, and we're used as a local force multiplier by the oil spill response people. So, but my point is, if local fire or emergency responders want to do drills with our folks, I guarantee you they will help and be glad to do that.
But that was, well, ahead, Tom.
Do you want to say anything?
No, I'm good, you
You're
covered
gonna
everything
fire?
in my thoughts as well,
Okay.
thank you.
So, well, I just had a question on that 3.9 acres, whatever it is. Does that include the space between the racks?
No, that's my point. It's if you take all of them and just scrunch them
Okay,
together and
but-
make a
but
big mat of
basically you
cages.
can't navigate in the gaps.
No, I'm not talking about navigation, I'm talking more about, I was speaking more to the issue of larval
Okay,
consumption.
I was just thinking about coverage, okay. All right, we're gonna do, any other harvesters, and then we're gonna turn it over to the aquaculturists or the farmers on the river. So any more, harvesters wanna speak? Okay, so anybody from the aquaculture industry want to speak?
I rest my case.
Okay, you wanna, come on
I'll
up.
say a few words, Tom. And you don't have to feel like you have to comment on everything I comment on, okay? You're the moderator, not the keynote speaker. Thank you. My name is Smokey McKean. I'm with the Pemaquid Oyster Company. We've been farming on the Damariscotta River for 37 years. We've hosted a oyster festival in the town of Damariscotta, and this past year in Booth Bay. We've done 20 festivals as fundraisers. We've given out $185,000 from the profits of the festival that have mostly gone back to the community. We've given grants to the Salt Bay School. We've given grants to the fire departments. We've given grants to the town of Damariscotta for pump out station, for the alewife restoration project at the mills. I don't have the list in front of me, but we've given a lot of money back to the community. There's been a lot of development on the river since we started 37 years ago. There's a lot more houses on the shore. A lot of people have moved to town knowing that there are oyster farms in their viewscape. And they bought houses on the shore, knowing that some of us are making a living on the water. The oysters clean the water. So if you have a septic system that's not running at 100% efficiency, it's putting bacteria in the water. It's adding to the nitrogen load that fertilizes the plankton that the clams and the oysters feed on. So the more shellfish that are in the river, the cleaner the water is. We have done some carrying capacity, biological carrying capacity studies, and maybe my partner Chris could address that at some point tonight. But you don't even need a carrying capacity study to look at the water in the summertime. We call it pea soup green. The color of the water is green, and that's the phytoplankton that's growing in the water. And in spite of how many millions of oysters we've put in the water is still dark green in the summertime. It's clear now because the sunshine, the temperatures have changed and the water's cleared out. But in the summertime, it's the color of pea soup, and that's feeding all the clams and all the oysters. There are wild oysters in the river now that weren't there when we started farming in the late 80s, the mid 80s. And some of the clam diggers, the harvesters, have made part of their living, at least, picking oysters in the Damariscotta River. They don't have to dig them. They just lean over and pick them up and put them in their hod. What else was I going to mention? I don't know. I would happily entertain any questions. I'm also serving on the South Bristol Aquaculture Ordinance Draft Committee, I guess we call it. And so we're talking about a lot of these same issues in South Bristol. So conversation continues.
Okay,
I have a couple things.
oh yeah, I'm sorry, come on up.
Hello, my name is Jeff Auger. I work with Atlantic Aqua Farms and Muscungus Bay Aquaculture on the Damariscotta River. I've been here now for just over 10 years farming oysters on the Damariscotta River. And it's hard as an aquaculturist, I think, in a forum like this to not feel attacked, especially when you have people claiming that our industry can be a plague for their river. I am extremely proud of the work that we do, of the community that we've created, and the benefit that we give our town. I also think that there's a disconnect between some of the knowledge that people have of what it means to be an aquaculturist and what they've been told by outside organizations. A lot of the questions that you guys had, navigation, effect on commercial shellfishing, these have been issues that have been debated from what I've become to understand for over the last 43 years in the legislature. It has created the lease structure that we have. I think if you were to ask an aquaculturist what it means to get a lease, they would cry to you that it is one of the hardest things you could possibly do. I know other commercial fishermen and women think that they have a lot of regulations, but I would love to see them react to the stuff that we have to go through. Navigation is one of the 8 criteria that we have to abide by. If our lease unreasonably interferes with the navigation of an area, it is illegal for that lease to be granted. Commercial fishing, adverse effects on commercial fishing, it is illegal for aquaculture leases to adversely affect the commercial fishery of an area. So I understand the concern. These are all very legitimate concerns. I would appreciate that people approach us personally and not in a public forum so we can have this discussion. But this is stuff that we go through and we think about constantly as we're applying for all these leases. And that is probably some of the frustration that we feel when we come to a forum like this and are accused of interfering unreasonably in these manners when we've spent years trying to prove that we're not. The average lease in the state of Maine was taking about 3 years to get. It takes about 2 years to grow an oyster. So if you put your foot down and talk about how you want to become an oyster farmer today, you're not going to generate any revenue for 5 years. And so it's a fundamentally different industry than the wild fishery or commercial fishing in the state, and it has fundamentally different concerns, and that's why people like Chris and Bill and Tony and Barb, the founders of this industry and of this thing that is starting to grow on the East Coast, generated the law that we have today. I also would welcome if anybody has comments, concerns, or questions of specifically our farm, but I think all of the growers on the river, we are very open and we are very willing to talk. You heard we bring people out on tours. We don't ignore phone calls. We want to be part of this community because we feel so strongly about it. And the only way to become part of it is if people reach out to us. I think Tom did that this summer. We solved a couple of issues that you had around your property on the water. It was a very easy ask and a very easy thing for us to do. So
I agree with that.
I think I come from a state where commercial shell fishermen and aquaculturists get along very well. And it's sad for me to see an organization kind of drive a wedge between fishermen. So I would think that fishermen can figure it out, and I think it's a solvable problem. Thank you. Any questions? Okay.
Okay, is there any, before we open to the public, the general public, any other professional group? I'm sorry, that.
So I'm Bill Mook, and with Mook Sea Farm, and I want to talk a little bit about the water quality aspect of all this and some of the things that our industry has done from the very beginning. And I know you didn't mean it this way, but when you talk about how the Potomac is pristine and the Damariscotta, wasn't so pristine, I take a little issue with that because we too spent a lot of effort in the early years, in the mid-'80s or so, cleaning up the river. We were the ones who got it was then the Damariscotta River Association. We partnered with them, the whole group of growers, and we developed a water quality monitoring program that was recognized by the state, so that became part of the state sampling for determining whether areas were open or closed. And as part of that, we did shoreline surveys, and we cleaned up the river. And I should back up a little and say that the reason we had to do that was that we got closed. Everybody had talked about how great the Damariscotta River is, really clean and all that, and then right in the middle of the summer, we're all harvesting, and all of a sudden they closed the river because of high fecal coliform levels. So we said, well, we need to deal with this and try to correct it. So we did. I'd like to, and I will say, it is a really clean river, and that the oysters not only filter the water and remove excess nitrogen, they also, all the gear, and this has been some very interesting recent studies of this, are significantly increasing the biodiversity, which is a huge issue, as part of how our climate is changing. And we see that all the time. We'll see all kinds of marine organisms, growing on the outside of our cages and our gear, and the fish that it attracts that swim all around. And so I believe some of them are reproducing in there as well. The other thing, though, is what I do in the hatchery is essentially testing the water quality every time we do a spawn and every time we do a change of water in our larval tanks. In 1998, I started the hatchery season. We were small then. We weren't able to rear a single larvae. In those days, we were doing multiple different species. We couldn't get any larvae to go through the larval phase, to go through metamorphosis and become a juvenile. And I was that close to closing down the business. Maybe some of you wish I had. And wondering whether I was going to lose my house. It was an incredibly stressful year. And it turns out we had a neighbor. I won't mention names, but many of you probably know who this guy was. And he was a septic tank pumper. He'd gotten into the porta potty business, and he was getting rid of some of that stuff for free. He was charging people twice, $75 in those days for pumping, $75 for dumping in the sanitary district, only he would skip the dumping in the sanitary district part, had a hose that went right into the river about 100 yards from our intake to the hatchery. And let me tell you, there was some bad stuff in that water, and it was not just poop. There were some really pretty bad chemicals that were associated with all the porta potty stuff. And my point is that if it weren't for us, that would never have been found out. He would have kept going. And after he was shut down, Fitch Cove, which is just to the south of our land-based site, all of a sudden the soft-shell clams came back. All of a sudden people were able to lobster in there. Now, of course, the water is too warm and there's very little lobstering at all. But anyway, so I just want to make the point that we are, to be an oyster farmer, you are de facto an environmentalist. You have to have clean water to do what we do. And so we're really passionate about that. I would also add, I think it was Mr. Pinkham talking about going down the river and there are cans and stuff floating in the river. Well, what fishery do you know that gets all of its members together? We have a cleanup every year. We donate a dump truck and we take it to the town landing. We have boats going up and down the river, and we clean we find all of our loose gear that's gotten away, or we try to, and we get rid of clamming gloves. We get rid of lobster pot warp and everything else we find. And I don't know, Jeff and Steve, how many? Is it a full dump truck load we bring out every year? Yeah. So, anyway, just, you know, we do feel like we're being a little vilified here because of this whole thing with, you know, taking up the whole river and all that, but I think it's important to put it all in context, and we really do care about our environment. Thanks.
I just want to clarify something.
Sure, I know.
I wasn't saying Damariscotta River is not pristine. I was just trying to explain how our Shellfish Committee has really, we're in the forefront in Madama of cleaning up the river. And they feel the same way you do. There's a lot of
Yeah, that was my
ownership.
point. I wanted to
Right.
draw that parallel.
Right, but it wasn't to say that the Damariscotta River is not beautiful and clean.
Okay, any other oyster farmers that want to speak? All right, so before we open to the public, questions or whatever, can the DMR speak to the issue of the planning for 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road?
So, this is gonna get a little awkward, Tom. We communicated extensively with you before this meeting, and we said that we would be happy to come and sort of provide an aquaculture
Right.
101 discussion, and we were not prepared, or
Okay, I didn't see
we're
you.
not gonna do perspective.
All right, I didn't see you comment on that part of the agenda. I know you struck out the rest, but I don't remember that. But,
Yeah.
okay, I apologize if I missed that. All right. Well, I think that's, you know, I think speaking for Damariscotta before I open to the public, I think we've been, obviously, we've been good neighbors to the aquaculture industry, otherwise it wouldn't be the dominant industry in the state of Maine. As far as number of oyster farms and whatever. But it doesn't mean that we don't have concerns. And without us being able to express those concerns, we feel a little frustrated, I guess, at times, or some of the, I mean, if you look at the comprehensive plan that we're now working on in Damariscotta, it mentions a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. So I think dialogue is always positive, and there was no intent here to, ambush anybody. It's just sharing information, and we're getting answers. And I think we even came up with a couple of suggestions that DMR might take into consideration and/or legislators. So it's going to be difficult when you get people with different opinions together. But I think everybody was professional tonight, and I appreciate it. And if you feel offended, I would apologize for the rest of us who may have put pressure on you, but I thought it was a positive experience to date. And so we'll let the public come up if there are ask any questions they want to have, and then we'll be done. Anybody from the public want to speak? Oh, in the back.
Rufus Garcia on the Newcastle Select Board. I just have a general question about the oyster farms and the leasing. Is there any pressure from, say, out of state or multinational investors trying to get into your territory? Is that something that is a concern? Is that something that legislators are looking at? I don't know, it seems like whenever there's an industry that's booming, somebody from outside tries to come in and, put some money in. And I'm just curious if that's anything that's anybody's aware of or is happening. Apparently not.
So, our company is owned by, our parent company is the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, which is a pension plan in the province of Ontario, made up of 350,000 teachers. They have a natural resources division that used to invest in things like avocado farms. They owned a whole bunch of stuff, but they have a strong environmental mission, and as a result of that, they decided to invest in aquaculture. But I work for an American company. We have 3 American LLCs. Everyone at Muscongas Bay Aquaculture is local. Our GM and her husband both work at the company. So I don't know that that's a public forum question. If you have specific concerns, I'm happy to answer them. But
I guess I was more asking if it was a concern of people that were in the industry, and it seems that it's not.
It's not a concern of mine.
So maybe I can answer that from the association point of view, because we represent the commercial growers in the state, and 99.8% of all of our companies are family-owned companies, including a Canadian company which is owned by two brothers and a father, the salmon company. We have invested over the last 22 years in a training academy, which is designed to train small owner-operators, principally from the commercial fishing community, with the skills that they need to become aquaculture farmers. And that's really what's driven the growth in the sector over the last probably 10 years or so. If you look at the people who are applying for leases or LPAs, many of those people went through our training academy. So we put over 450 people through that training academy, and roughly 60% of those people are coming from working waterfront backgrounds, and they are the people who are starting new farms in the state. So from an association point of view, we have made an effort, very conscious, driven by our board of directors, but also by our members, to provide training for people coming from traditional working waterfront families so that they can make a choice. They may choose, 40% of the people who go through that program choose not to become aquaculturists, and that's not a bad thing. If they go through that program and they look at it and say, this is something we don't want to do, you don't want somebody to go into something and fail, right? So you want to give them exposure ahead of time so that they can make those choices. And for the people who have gone into that field and through that program, is everybody going to be successful? Probably not, but many of them are. And probably the most exciting thing about that program is last year we created the first Department of Labor apprenticeship program recognized by the Department of Labor for an apprenticeship program for aquaculturists. And we are attracting people, actually, and this was a surprise to us, two of the people who were in the apprenticeship program, one is a fisherman from Alaska, and one is a fisherman from California. So we've got people from working waterfront communities in other states who are now starting to look at Maine and say, okay, something's going on here, let's go there and learn about it. I would much prefer that we were training only Maine people, but the fact that we're attracting people from other states, I think is a good sign. And the focus of that program is training people to be their own entrepreneurs, their own business owners. So that's, to your point, from an association point of view and from the growers' point of view, we're really focusing on trying to help people who are getting into the sector not only understand the technical piece from a biological point of view, but also the business management piece, all the other things that go with owning a business. And we're excited about it. I have two staff members who are fired up about it. They're young. They're psyched that we've got young people coming to be able to learn how to do that. Yeah.
You might be the right one to ask, how many individual leaseholders are there? Or separate entities who are not, somebody had asked the number about what's the number of individual leaseholders?
Sure.
So you probably have that
Are you
information.
including LPAs or excluding LPAs?
Well, why don't we do the leases that are the big ones and then the LPAs?
Yeah, so the leases, we have roughly 152 leases in the state, and we have roughly 90 people or entities that are around that. And the reason for that is farms often have more than one lease site. And the reason they do is because they want to do crop rotation and site rotation. So it's one of the most effective ways they can use to manage risk without any chemicals.
So it's about 90 individuals or corporations that own
correct.
the big leases.
And then with the LPA, as somebody said it earlier, I think, I'm not sure who it was, we've got roughly 800 LPAs, and somebody can have up to 4 of those. So we actually don't track the individual people on the LPAs, but if you do the math, it's probably around 200, 250 people who have LPAs.
So out of all those, it's about 300 individuals.
Probably 300, 350, depending on how you count them, yeah.
And that's for the whole state.
Correct, for the whole state. Yeah, for the whole state. And so if you compare that, for example, to license holders in an individual fishery, depending on which fishery you're talking about, we're not all that far off some of the fisheries that are in the state.
You're probably really, but you're probably the best organized.
I wish I could say yes to that, but some of my folks would probably disagree with that.
Can I just, so Mark Gallagher, Protect Maine's Fishing Heritage, and I just want to thank Mr. Bell for his support for small owner-operated aquaculture facilities, because that's what we believe in. But the concern that we have is, in statute still now in Maine, is that you can have a 100-acre facility, and you can have up to 1,000 acres in aggregate. And as long with a limited criteria to actually get a lease, or 10 leases that aren't attached, but are in aggregate. So as long as we have those on the books with a limited criteria for a successful application lease, then there is a concern about large industrial aquaculture from foreign companies coming into the state of Maine.
So just to set the record straight here, and Mark and I have done this many times, Mark gets paid to represent the folks he represents, I get paid to represent the folks that I represent. I don't work for a law firm, he does. He probably gets paid better than I do, just for the record. But the reality is, if you go over 500 acres in the state of Maine, you have to file a site rotation and fallowing plan with the DMR. And they have to approve that. And if they don't like what you're proposing to do, they will deny it. Compare it to Washington State, okay? Washington State has had aquaculture leases for over 100 years. One company has 14,000 acres. We are minor compared to any other state in the country with respect to what is allowed here. And that's the result of a legislature, and I've only been doing what I do for 20 years. I was a grower for many years. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the legislature. They are a very thoughtful, practical, common sense group of people. They, over the years, said, okay, we want to allow growth, but we're going to limit it. And this is how we're going to limit it. And that was a product of multiple years of discussion in front of the legislature. We didn't always like what they passed. In many cases, we objected to it, but we're living with it. And I think if you compare the Maine regulatory climate to any other state's regulations, and in many cases other countries' regulations, we are in very good shape. And the reason I say that is because we get probably 2 or 3 times a year a delegation from another country or another state that comes to Maine to study what we do, how we do it, and then they take it back to those delegations, those jurisdictions. So we're viewed, and I'm not saying this because I think we're great, I'm just saying this is the fact, and I'm glad to document it for anybody who asks the question. We're viewed as kind of a gold standard at an international and national level. The reason for that is because Maine is a group of practical people who come up with practical solutions and have discussions like this and change things over time if they think there's something that they need to deal with. And I think that's a good thing, that's not a bad thing.
And I agree with Mr. Bell as well. I think tonight was a very good thing, and I think it's important to have that dialogue. What I would say is that you should not be concerned about my compensation, or I'm not concerned about my compensation, I'm concerned about your compensation. And one of the things that I've learned over 30 years of politics is that if you don't like the message, attack the messenger. At the end of the day, DMR can approve 1,000 acres to one organization if they're not connected, 100 acre per facility. That's the law.
And they've never done it.
So I got a question. Do these guys get paid by the hour?
Sebastian doesn't.
So, I think I want to make a motion to adjourn for David.
If I may add one point, because I firmly believe that communication is critical for this, for everything. And to that extent, the DMR does have the Aquaculture Advisory Council, which is akin to the Shellfish Advisory Council that's been around for a long time. I represent the oyster sector. There's a kelp sector, mussel sector, and the salmon sector. We meet on a regular basis, and we serve as a sounding board, both the DMR, in both two directions. And one of the things we do at every meeting is bring forward concerns of the industry so the DMR hears concerns, and that's part of my job. And so anyone that would like to express something to get to DMR through the council, I'm all ears.
Okay.
I'm getting up, sort of, gotta move it along, real quick, go ahead.
Sure. So my name's David Callan. I'm an attorney. 20 years ago, I was a lab tech at the Darling Marine Center. I was going up and down the river and measuring temperature and salinity, actually filtering some of the phytoplankton that Smokey was talking about and going back to the lab and identifying what it was. Now I'm an attorney. I do get paid by the hour now. The Damariscotta River has been a part of my life for a long, long time, participating in cleanups, all of these different things. One of the things I want to say, Maine's a home rule state, right? One of the things that has always been great about Maine is it has the ability to have different local communities make different decisions. Dana Morse mentioned that the first aquaculture regulation he was aware of was in 1840. I haven't seen it, but I'll bet Dana a beer that was a municipal regulation, not a state regulation. And it's been that way for a long, long time. That's part of the foundation of the state and the way our governance works. And the fact that we've had these local communities speak up, I was heartened to hear that the legislature has responded. Part of why they're directing DMR to do this literature review is because of what they've heard bubble up in the community, and that's happening at the local level and includes local regulation. One of the things I do want to speak to, there's a letter that DMR has in the back that they're putting out where they talk about their view on what they have exclusive jurisdiction over. And that's the exclusive jurisdiction to make the lease decision. Our view, and we've got rebuttals to the letter that they've put out, is that there's lots of room for regulation on top of that. It happens at the local level and fills in the gaps. One of the things that you've heard Amanda Ellis speak to in her very eloquent presentation, she said the state doesn't get involved in site selection. Well, if it's something they're not getting involved in, then that's not something that's exclusive to their jurisdiction, right? So there's room for local control and local regulation, and different communities can make different decisions about what the balance is and what the right way to allocate these public resources are among the different users. And that's one of the things that we're pushing for, and glad that the communities are having these conversations and that each community is making local decisions, because that both pushes the state and means that different communities are getting together and deciding what that community should look like.
Go ahead.
Just a question. When you get at the local community level, who in these local communities are making the actual decisions?
Yeah,
and how do you make sure that they're not biased?
So it's the legislative process. It's the same way you make sure that the legislature's not biased. We have a political process for adopting ordinances, and that's the way our political process works, right? And so, unlike a lease decision, where, you know, again, Amanda Ellis described it as more like a court proceeding, where the decision maker can't be biased. In our political process, we all bring our views, and we decide, based on those views, and some call those views biases, those are political leanings, whatever they are, what the rules are, and we make laws. And one of the ways we make laws is ordinances, and we do that, I mean, in a lot of these towns, by town meetings. Some of them have town councils or city councils or other less direct democracy forms of representation. But that's what it is, the same way we make laws anyway, state and local level.
Okay, thank you. Harbor Master, I forgot the Harbor Masters, do they want to speak?
I'm actually Deputy Harbor Master.
Yeah, Deputy Harbor Master.
I get a lot of people mentioning the moratorium word, and they've got it in communities around us, because instead of a moratorium, we could consider locating areas that would be acceptable for farms in advance. So rather than someone coming along and doing a lot of legwork and say, I want to do this oyster farm, and then everybody objects to it, but if there was an area that we said, okay, well, these are the areas that we see that would go forward without a lot of resistance in advance.
Sounds
So
like
as opposed to a moratorium.
That sounds like a good suggestion. Okay, now we'll open to the public and then we will adjourn. So anybody from the public that is not an official capacity, just citizen of the towns that are here. Anybody? Okay, go on, I'm sorry.
David, I'm sorry, could you repeat who you represent?
Yeah, so I'm with Drummond Woodsum, and I'm here today with Protect Maine's Fishing Heritage.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any last thoughts, comments, concerns? questions? All right, the meeting is adjourned, thank you.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I second.